What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the finale of What If Deku Had Every Quirk. If you guys have made it this far in this series, I appreciate you guys so much, considering that not a lot of people do. Most of the time, they just wait for the movies and then they click on that. So, if you're here, you're a straight real one. If you've been here for the whole time, then consider leaving a like on this part because it's literally going to be the best one, I think. It's going to go crazy and there's pretty much just going to be all action. So if you guys going to like this one, definitely consider maybe checking out the movie of this. But with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Immediately upon inspecting the situation, Deku notices that Stain is right about to stab Ida in his back, potentially a lethal blow, and what Izuku would do is something completely unexpected. Izuku uses his quirk to the absolute max, kicking Stain straight in the ribs and shattering one of them, leading to Stain getting sent flying onto a wall, ricocheting off of it and then landing inside of a trash can. Izuku then grabs Ida, seeing that he didn't get stabbed, and would ask him what in the world he thinks he's doing here. Why was he anywhere near the hero killer? He shouldn't be anywhere near here. And Ida would just be like, get out of here, this is my fight, obviously not being able to move. But Deku would say, you can't fight anybody right now. And so he would go to grab Ida, and it's at this moment when Stain would begin getting up. And he would stand up straight, looking towards the direction of Deku, before saying, he's not going anywhere. All you fake heroes are the same. He's gonna die. And Deku looks at the direction of Stain before saying, I don't think so. Stain at this moment then activates his Bloodlust Binding ability, the same thing that he used on Endeavor and the heroes, to pretty much cause them all to be struck with fear. And it would be at this moment that Izuku would smirk and let out his own Bloodlust Binding. That's a technique that you can use and that anybody can use. Bloodlust Binding isn't some quirk. That's just killing intent, just letting out a bunch of killing intent. And so Izuku would let out a bunch as well towards Stain, and Stain, realizing that Izuku was not backing down and that ability didn't scare Izuku whatsoever, he would say he's not going anywhere, that he's gonna save everyone. And after hearing this, Stain would point his sword at the direction of Deku and say that he likes him. He'll let him go for now, but next time he won't be so lucky. Stain would then do parkour and jump on top of the roofs before making a grand exit, and it would be at this moment that Ida would get up, finally having Stain's quirk wear off, and then Izuku would look at the direction of Ida as Ida just pushes Deku and say, what are you thinking? You let the hero killer get away. And Deku just looks at Ida and would be like, are you serious? I saved your life. I just saved your life. Check yourself. He straight punches Ida square in the jaw and sends Ida to the floor. And Ida just looks up at Izuku and would be like, what? He's shocked. But Deku then looks at Ida and grabs him by the collar and says, do you have any idea what you were doing? Had I not have been here, he would have paralyzed you or worse, killed you. What were you gonna do then? What was your brother gonna do then with you dead? How in the world was you chasing after the hero killer the smart decision? Come on, class leader, tell me something. And Ida would just start crying, just looking at Deku and just knowing that he effed up. And Deku just looks at him and says that he'll talk later, but for now he needs to, help Native out. And so he grabs Native and Ida and calls the ambulance. The ambulance would arrive, and it would be at this moment that a Nomu would end up arriving and would pretty much shoot towards the direction of Deku. Deku at this point would shoot up into the air, and Gran Torino, who would have already arrived, would notice that Deku would blitz up into the air and kick the Nomu so hard its head would literally get shot off from its body. Suddenly, Izuku lands on top of it and stomps it with his foot, and then goes on to look back at the direction of all of the heroes that were standing there, smirks and says, don't worry, the threat was neutralized. And so pretty much what would end up happening is 2 days would pass, and during those 2 days, Izuku and Ito would end up having a little moment between themselves where Ito apologizes for his actions and stuff, and the police chief dog tells them that, you know, they're not going to get credit and it's just going to go to Endeavor and Gran Torino, and that pretty much what's going to be happening is that, you know, they're just kind of going to try to cover up the situation as much as possible. And so what pretty much goes down is right after this, Gran Torino would tell Izuku that he truly does wish that Izuku's quirk was Jet, because the way that Izuku was just fighting out there was impressive. It reminded him a lot of his old days, and he wishes that he could have had some sort of successor as well. Izuku laughs and thanks him for, you know, his time, his hospitality and all that stuff. And Gran Torino just looks at him and says, "Anytime, kid," smiling. As from here, 2 days would pass, and on this particular day, Deku would wake up with a brand new quirk. Izuku would begin testing it out, and it would just so happen that he gets a pretty bad quirk. What pretty much ends up happening is that on this day, all of the students were about to have the hero race where they were going to check their progress, but instead of Izuku ending up actually arriving to school, he would activate a quirk that could allow him to turn into animals like Beast Boy. But he doesn't just gain their abilities, he also gains their IQ. And Izuku, the first thing that he transformed into was a goat, because he's the goat. And, you know, when this happens, Izuku, you know, he starts like being like, meh, you know what I mean? And then Inko walks in and she would be like, Izuku, you know what I mean? She grabs the goat and puts it in Izuku's room, and she says, hopefully he doesn't trash the place too much. She then calls Yue and tells him that he got a bad quirk today. And Aizawa would end up answering the phone and would be like, what quirk did he get? And she'd say, he turned himself into a goat, and I don't think he's going to be fixing that anytime soon. 24 hours would pass, and Izuku would finally wake up the next day with a brand new quirk. On this day, he would be told that they're going to be having the final exams in about 1 week, and so they would have 1 week to prep for this. Because there's not going to be any battle or any of that stuff, Izuku's quirk for this day doesn't really matter, but just know it's probably some random quirk. And then after this, what pretty much ends up going down is that for this week, Izuku decides to study, but on this particular day, they pretty much all end up going towards the mall, and because Shigaraki doesn't have that encounter with Stain, and Stain's video doesn't go out to the media and get really, really popular, characters like Dabi, Toga, and Spinner don't actually end up joining the League of Villains. Not only that, but what pretty much also ends up happening is that Stain is still a free man, and so Shigaraki doesn't attack Deku at the mall. If he did, Deku would probably fold bro like a complete omelet, so, you know, it's kind of a good thing. But what pretty much ends up happening is for this week, Deku would simply study, and that entire week he would go on and get mid-level quirks. Eventually though, the day of the finals would finally come, and Deku on this particular day would end up getting a candy quirk, allowing him to turn anything that he touches into a candy beam, and also giving him access to using a candy beam, just like Majin Buu, right? And so what pretty much ends up happening is that due to the fact that he and Bakugo both have some decent synergy, and they think that not really anybody can face off against All Might, they would end up pairing Bakugo and Deku versus All Might. And so the match would commence. All Might would put on the 500-pound weights on his arms and legs and stuff, but Deku would tell All Might to take those off, to trust him. He's not going to be needing those. And All Might would say, "Are you sure, young Midoriya? You do understand that I am basically at my prime now, right?" And Deku would say, "Do I understand? I don't think you understand how good of a team me and Bakugo make when it comes to fighting anybody." And Bakugo would smirk and say, "Trust, All Might. You take those things off or you're gonna pretty much die here." And All Might would say, "Sure," crushing them with each hand and then breaking them before looking at the direction of Deku and Bakugo, and immediately Bakugo and Deku would split off in different directions, getting cover from the buildings. Suddenly, Izuku would hold out a hand sign for a formation, and Bakugo would immediately throw a grenade which would explode in front of All Might. All Might would smile, realizing that they're using teamwork, and Deku from here would blitz in before kicking All Might full force in the jaw and sending All Might flying back. All Might recuperates himself, turning around and going to punch Bakugo, who would twirl mid-air and punch All Might square in the face, sending him flying, and a dust cloud would appear in All Might's face. Suddenly, right after this, Deku comes in and takes a hold of All Might, straight grabbing him by the face and palming him and transforming All Might into a just piece of chocolate. All Might would stand there as a piece of chocolate and be completely inanimate, and Izuku and Bakugo would laugh and like smile, saying that was too easy. Bakugo would say that today's Quirk made it way too easy, and that if Izuku would have just used nothing, they still probably could have won. It just would have taken a whole lot more out of them. And Deku would say, you could say that again. Facing a 100% All Might would have been ludicrous. Bakugo laughs, and so they get the dub. Eventually, they're all informed about the forest training camp, and so what pretty much ends up happening is that they end up all just, doing their own things, getting prepared for this. They all go out shopping for their own individual things. And so what pretty much ends up happening is we find ourselves in the perspective of Izuku and Bakugo on the bus. They'd be talking about things and everybody would kind of be having a conversation, but eventually they get to the forest and Aizawa would trick them into falling off of the cliff and making their way towards the training grounds. They do so, and once they end up arriving towards the forest where they're going to be training at, they would all be tasked with training their quirks. But Deku decides that because of the fact that he has a new quirk every day, he can't particularly train the quirk. And so instead, what Izuku would rather doing would be training hand-to-hand combat with Aizawa. Aizawa obviously still using his scarf because he's not going to handicap himself, and he would be surprised because Izuku could relatively keep up with Aizawa, who is using his scarf and isn't exactly holding back as much as he should be. But eventually, the next day would come by, and on this day, Deku would wake up with a rage quirk, not really understanding that he even had a quirk this day, just because it didn't really activate. Deku knows he has a quirk every day, but sometimes he thinks that they're duds, because some days he has a quirk that he doesn't really know how to control or gain access to, and it doesn't work in the way that most normal quirks do. It would be a rage quirk, so nothing would really happen until the end of the day, when Izuku would notice a young Koda making his way towards his favorite hiding spot and beginning to cry tears. Deku walks over and would ask him what's wrong before getting down on knee level and, looking towards Koda and saying that, he's a hero, he can talk to him. Koda would tell him to get lost, and Deku would just say that, sometimes we all need somebody to talk to, even heroes. And he puts a bowl of curry down next to Koda before telling him that if he needs anybody, he's there. And everybody else that is with him is also there for him. And Koda would just be like, stupid heroes. But suddenly, a figure of a massive man would arrive, and this would be Muscular. Deku would then notice this as he was walking away, and he would make his way back, only to see Muscular approaching Koda, as he would say, looks like it's my lucky day. I get to snap a twig in half. Easy kills. Almost feels as easy as a video game. Kid, you might as well be a bot. And Koda just looks at Muscular in complete fear, realizing exactly who this is once Muscular takes off his cloak. And then Koda would cry, saying, It's you. You're the one that killed my... And Muscular says, shut up, kid, smacking Koda into the wall. And Izuku would immediately get angered by this, rushing in and punching Muscular square in the face. However, Muscular just tanks it and would grab onto Deku's body with one arm and toss him into the mountain. Deku would jump off of it with his legs, and then he would stand up straight, as Koda would say, he has a broken arm. And then Izuku would ask him if he's okay, and Koda would say he's fine, but that's the guy that killed his parents. That's why he was so upset. He killed my parents, he would say. And Deku would say, the Waterhouse heroes. Those are your parents, right? Koda nods, and Muscular would say, those were your parents? That's great. Can't believe that I finally get to end the bloodline. I didn't think I'd ever get so lucky, but I guess it's my lucky day. And from here, what would pretty much end up happening is that Izuku would have a source of red energy just beaming off of him, and Koda looks at Deku's eyes and sees that they're glowing somewhat, and Izuku would say, you took this kid's parents, and for that, you're gonna pay. He then rushes in at the direction of Muscular and throws a punch which would clash evenly with Muscular almost, but Muscular increases the muscle fibers and bam! Sends Izuku back flying, landing on a tree and crashing down on the ground. Izuku gets up sort of weakened after that, and then using Bloodlust Binding would use it towards Muscular, who would simply laugh at that and say that if he thinks that he's going to be scared of his Bloodlust, then he should try his. Releasing his own, Kodo would pass out, and Izuku, realizing the severity of this situation, would realize that rage, it's his rage. That's the quirk. He just got a power amp. All he needs to do is release more anger. So Izuku, in his mind, would picture Muscular killing Inko, and he would scream out in such a way that Muscular just was not expecting. Izuku then blitzes at the direction of Muscular and, just straight grabs him by the neck and just straight snaps Muscular's neck and throws him off of the cliff, then rushing towards Koda and then putting him right where Aizawa was at before telling him that villains are attacking and that he needs to take care of the students. From here, using his anger, he would go inside of the forest and begin destroying villains one by one until finally All For One arrives. And once All For One arrives, things would finally change, because this time around, All Might is actually present, so All For One decided to show himself, and he would also be there with his successor Shigaraki. Deku and All Might, seeing this all play out, would immediately tag team against both of them, but because Shigaraki is fairly a weakling kind of character, Izuku would easily be able to knock out Shigaraki, with All For One being surprised at Izuku's speed. Izuku and All Might both tag team All For One, and it would be going good until All For One reveals the identity of Shigaraki as Tenko Shimura, and All Might would kind of feel everything kind of rip apart from him, you know what I mean? He kind of loses track of what's going on. And Izuku snaps him out of it. He's like, "All Might, we don't have time to be thinking about what All For One did to him or anything like that. We have to fight this guy. Right now he's threatening to kill all the students. So unless you're willing to take all of them dying just because you can't perform, then do something, All Might. Go beyond. Plus Ultra." And All Might just looks at his hands, smiles, and says, "Thanks, Izuku. You can stay back now," blitzing at All For One and then landing at the final finishing blow, taking the villain out once and for all. And so All For One, Shigaraki, Kurogiri, Muscular, and all of the other characters who would have ended up showing up for this specific event would all end up getting captured, leading to a cleanup situation happening, and eventually Izuku going towards the hospital because he had a couple of fractured bones in his right hand, the ones that he ended up clashing with Muscular. The next day the quirk would wear off, and he would end up getting a quirk that is very, very useless. It gives him no bones in his body, a jellyfish quirk. And with no bones in his body, he couldn't move all day. So it was kind of a really, really bad quirk to get. But on the flip side, he didn't feel any pain. And so when his bones finally came back, they were healed because they came back as fresh new bones, So pretty much what ends up going down after this is that Izuku would find himself in a little bit of a 1 week time skip. And what Izuku would see is Todoroki and Inasa facing off against each other, getting in each other's way, not allowing the other to perform well in the exam against King Orca, considering that they were doing the provisional license test right now. Eventually, Izuku snaps them out of it, and both of them are capable of getting their license. So is Bakugo, so the only person who needs to take the remedial course would be Kami, who didn't end up taking the exam. And so everybody this time around pretty much ends up getting their provisional licenses, and after that 2 days would go by, meaning the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and eventually Monday would come around and they would meet the big three. On this day, Deku would end up waking up with a weaker telekinesis quirk similar to his mother's, except actually it's a little bit weaker. So on this particular day, when Mirio ends up facing off against all of the students, and Mirio, fights everybody else and would be able to knock most of them out, Bakugo would tell Izuku that he wants to fight him one-on-one. And so Bakugo would jump in and face off against Mirio. However, Mirio, using the tactic of poking the eyes and landing an uppercut, would finally be able to land a blow on Bakugo, and Bakugo would get pretty much tanking a lot of damage, would be sent flying to the floor. Mirio then blitzing at the direction of Deku and going over to try to fight him hand-to-hand combat. However, because that's pretty much Deku's specialty, even though he has a weak quirk, he would easily be able to keep up up with Mirio, who is now completely naked. That would throw Deku off guard a little bit, but ultimately he continues throwing blow after blow after blow, and Bakugo then immediately shoots in with his explosions, shooting a blow at Mirio, which he would dodge, and because he would dodge the blow, the explosion would cause a dust storm to pop up. Deku not being able to see, he would then be like, Bakugo, get your head in the game, and Bakugo would say, I am. As from here, Mirio pops back up, and taking advantage of their moment of like bickering with one another, Mirio comes in and straight clobbers Deku on the side of the head, knocking him out, and then Bakugo would then get kicked by Mirio as he would say, Power! And they were completely caught off guard. Like in the whole years that Deku has had quirks, not once has he had a quirk similar to Mirio's. So Deku would think to himself that hopefully someday he can get access to something like that. That thing was incredibly powerful. And he's absolutely right. Mirio's quirk is so busted. But pretty much what ends up happening after this is that because Izuku didn't have a good quirk, he underperformed. However, he still did decent compared to Mirio's and what his original standards were. Pretty much what ends up happening is that Mirio would offer an internship with Sir Nide, and Izuku would end up accepting. This time, even though Sir Nide is a hard egg to crack, he would still end up stamping Izuku's thing, and ultimately what would pretty much end up going down is that Izuku would go on a patrol with Mirio. On this said patrol, Izuku would end up gaining the access to a storage quirk, which can pretty much store things inside of an inventory slot that he gained access to. However, that's literally all that he has access to, and then he would get a little girl bumping into him as she would look extremely scared and hurt and bruised. Izuku, picking her up, would ask her if she's okay, and suddenly Overhaul from the alleyway would make his appearance. This scene goes down just like in canon. Deku doesn't have a quirk powerful enough to beat Overhaul right now, and Mirio realizes that this is Overhaul, the one that they've been making a whole operation to take down for this past like months, you know what I mean? So he can't like ruin everything, you know what I mean? Like what if he messes everything up? So he tells Deku to like back down and give Eri back, and he does so. For the following next couple of days, Deku literally can't sleep over this, and he would tell Bakugo what he did. Bakugo would tell him that he definitely messed up and that he should have fought him. Die or not, he can't let somebody suffer any longer, knowing that they are. And Izuku would say that he knows. He failed as a hero today, but he promises the next time that he's able to save her, he's not gonna let her go. And Bakugo would send a text saying, you better not, gotta go, in the middle of a fight. And he would send the peace emoji. As from here, Bakugo would shoot an explosion at the villain and win. Then going on to have a little press conference thing with Best Genius. And pretty much after this, what would end up going down is that Izuku would finally arrive on the day of the raid. On this particular day, Izuku would gain the ability of rewind, and using this, he would go through the entire thing that Izuku and all of the other characters would do in canon. And going through it, he literally one-shots everybody. Using his ability of rewind, he can rewind these characters back to when they were babies, and that's exactly what Deku would do. He rewinds them to the point where they were kids and babies and stuff like that, and they were pretty much no longer factors in the battle. Eventually, Izuku arrives only to see Mirio facing off against Overhaul and seeing Mirio get hit with the quirk destroying bullet. However, Deku, realizing that, Mirio lost his quirk, would simply jump in the way, tap Mirio, and Mirio would get reverted back to when he still had it. Mirio then goes inside of the ground, comes out and uppercuts Overhaul, who didn't know that he could have got his quirk back that fast, and then Deku would end up blitzing in at Overhaul, who's still mid-air and wasn't able to catch balance or do anything or make contact with anything physical, so he wasn't able to do anything, and Izuku would tap Overhaul, turning him right back into a baby, and ultimately leading Overhaul to leading Overhaul to essentially be taken out immediately. And afterwards, Izuku would have a cleanup moment where he simply stands by the heroes, grabs Eri and tells her that he'll never let her go again. And Eri would cry, she smiles and cries at the same time, and eventually the whole situation would be avoided. Immediately, Izuku would send a text towards All Might asking him a question. Does he want to go back to his full prime once more? And All Might would be like, sure, because not only does All Might get to go back to his prime, but he also gets more years added to his lifespan. Deku having access to the quirk Rewind theoretically could just send people back to when they were a lot younger and save a lot of years of their life. And Deku would do so and revert a bunch of pro heroes that have been in action for years back to 10 years before. So all of them get younger, they keep their power, and ultimately Deku's ability of rewind would help Hero Society so much as a whole, helping out a bunch of people who were near death moments and a bunch of people who were sick in the hospital. Deku would rewind them to before they got sick and stuff like that. And so Deku would like go all over the news that day, and people would like really find out the name of Izuku Midoriya, or the Pro Hero Roulette. And that, ladies and gentlemen, would be the end to What If Deku had every quirk. Let me know what you guys thought about this one down below in the comment section. I definitely love recording this entire series, and I had a lot of fun doing it. If you guys go on to enjoy this one, then please consider leaving a like on all of the previous parts of this. Seeing as you already watched them all, you might as well do your boy a favor, as it helps so much in the algorithm. Seriously, you guys don't understand. And if you guys could do me the biggest favor in the world and just you know, watch the movie version of this, you know, just leave it playing in the background, or leave a like on it or something, or at least just click on it twice. That would help your boy out so incredibly much. Y'all don't understand. But with all that out of the way, and with me completely like stop begging and selling out, it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.